Hello and welcome to another Microsoft Flight Simulator tutorial. This one's a bit of a general tutorial and it's kind of for if you don't have a clue how to fly, and I'm going to try and tell you the basics of how to get into the air and get started. So as you can see, this is an airplane. You probably already knew that. What's it got on it? Well, let's shut the engine up to start off with. So this is a Cessna 152, so it's a trainer airplane, and you can see that it's got it's only 2 seats. It's got a high wing, the wings across the top of the plane, and on the wing you have these little things that move. They're called ailerons. So you've got one on the left side, one on the right side, and on the back you've got your elevator. So this is your elevator, wiggle wiggle. You also have your rudder on your tail fin, where it moves like that. You have flaps on the plane. The flaps do that. We'll talk about them more later. You've got your 2 wheels at the back and you've got your nose wheel at the front. So your 2 wheels at the back have brakes on them, the nose wheel does not. And you have your big spinny thing, what's called a propeller, which makes you go faster and slower. So that's basically the plane in a nutshell. Shell. So here's how to fly. So this is the cockpit. Kind of looks a bit daunting, I guess, for some people if you've never seen one before. What all is it? Well, it's all pretty simple, really. Most important gauge out of all of them is the airspeed indicator. I have an airspeed tutorial if you want to know more about how airspeed is read and all that kind of stuff. But basically, you need to have enough of this to take off. Too slow, your wing doesn't produce enough lift, and you stall, not like stalling a car if you drive a manual like a real person, but basically it just means that there's not enough air going over the wing and the wing doesn't provide enough lift and the airplane stalls. Yeah, that's enough on that. This is the artificial horizon. Normally this little line would be in the middle of that white line, which I'll demonstrate now. So you can see that that gauge wasn't correct, and that was because the engine wasn't started and we didn't have any suction. So now that we have enough air power to power the gauge, you can see that it looks correct. So this is how it normally looks, and this little orange line represents a plane, and the brown represents the ground, the blue represents the sky, and you'll see whenever we take off that this little orange thing will stay in the one place, but the background, the sky and the ground will move. So it will show if our plane is in bank, in other words it's tilted at an angle, or if it's climbing or descending, etc. So this is also our altimeter. So basically it is going to measure our height above sea level. You can also set an altimeter to measure your height above ground level, but today it's measuring our height above sea level. And you can see that we're already at 20 feet above sea level or something like that, and that's because even though the sea is right there, we're very, very slightly above sea level. So that's all you need to know about that. This is a turn coordinator, not really that important for today, more for IFR kind of flying. The part of this that is important is this little black ball, and this is a slip indicator, and this will show you if the airplane is flying straight or not. This is a compass, fairly standard, and this is a vertical speed indicator, so this is show you if your airplane is climbing or descending in feet per minute. These two are VOR indicators. They're used for navigation, not important. This is your radios, that's your RPM dial. That's for a BDF maybe? Or ADF, sorry. Is there an ADF? No, that must be another VOR needle. Okay, anyway, that's not really important. This is your fuel quantities, left tank, right tank, engine oil temperature, engine oil pressure, few switches, and important, this is your throttle. Push it forward to go faster, put it backwards, go slower. Mixture is your ratio of fuel to air that's going into the engine. Not important for this tutorial, but very important once you start climbing up and getting some altitude. If your mixture is too rich, i.e. your engine is getting too much fuel for the amount of air, then you'll need to pull this back a little bit, and you'll notice that your RPM will increase with your engine and it will off back into life. what else have we got here? We've got our flap and switch, which is for setting our different flap settings. So that's basically all that. This is a yoke, called a yoke for some weird reason, not quite sure why. Other people call it a joystick. Well, if it was just a stick, you would call it a joystick. If you're a French lover and you love Airbus planes, then they call it a side stick because it's at the side. Interesting. So other than that, what does it do? Right. So this is one of the most important things. We're going to talk about primary flight controls. So these are the main flight controls you need to fly. So number one is your elevator. So up and down. Important because if you don't use it right, you'll hit the ground. And this is how it works. So you pull back. This little piece of metal points up, and that means that the air flowing over this elevator will be deflected off that, push the tail down, which in turn pitches the nose up, so you climb. So pull back, go up, and push forward, it points down, air hits the back, pushes the tail up, pushes the nose down, points the nose down. So that's the elevator. Basically, pull back, bows get smaller, push forward, bows get bigger. What else? Ailerons. So this is our roll control. This is what banks the airplane, and it is controlled by ailerons. So these are ailerons, this thing flapping on the wing. So that's left roll, so you can see this aileron goes up. The other side will go down, you can see it pointing down. If I go right, you'll see this one goes up, and this one will go down. So yeah, that's your main flight controls. So the whole idea whenever you're taking off is basically to fly or to drive down the runway, pull back in this yoke, and maintain a safe airspeed that you're not going to stall and kill yourself, to climb away and go for a lovely, nice, pleasant flight. So the one last thing that you need to know about is your rudder pedals. So these are your rudder pedals. You might have some. If you don't, you can assign keys to them. They're not that complicated. So 2 pedals, your foot would go on these, your toes at the top, your heel at the bottom, and basically the idea is you push with your heel and it'll slide the rudder pedals. So that would be go right and that would be go left, and then if you push your toes, you have brakes on them. So that's your left wheel brake on your left foot, left toes, and that's your right wheel brake on your right toes. And so yeah, whenever you're on the ground, you don't need to use differential braking. By differential braking, I mean pushing one brake. You don't need to use differential braking unless you're trying to turn in tight spots. So basically, whenever you're going down the runway and you're trying to keep straight on the runway, you push the pedal, you slide your foot in the direction that you want to go. That's basically all you need to know about that. Oops. So yeah, what we're going to do now is we're going to try and go down the runway. We're going to let the speed get up to about 60 knots, so the big 60, and then we're going to pull gently back on the yoke, and we're going to climb away about 70 knots, so in between, halfway in between the 60 and 80. How are we going to do that? Well, the first thing you need to always make sure is that your airplane is set, so your trim is set for takeoff. So you can see our trim is set here. What's trim? Well, trim is basically the angle that this little elevator is set at without you pulling or pushing on the yoke. So that means that if you're flying at a certain speed, your plane will do a certain thing. So if your trim is set for takeoff, whenever you get about 60-70 knots, it should start to pitch up by itself, and that is basically the plane wants to fly. So the elevator is trimmed for about 60-70 knots, and it means that you won't need to push forward or pull back on the yoke if it's in trim, but we'll talk more about that once we get going. So trimming can be quite complicated. I have another tutorial on that, but it's something that you need to be very aware of and something you need to practice a lot. Other things you need to consider for takeoff: the wind direction. If you always, whenever you're trying to take off or land into or take off into a headwind, the idea of that is if you've got wind coming into your face, it means that you've got more wind or more airflow over your wing, produces more lift, and it means that you're flying slower. So if you've got a 10 knots headwind and you're flying at 60 knots, because you've got that 10 knot headwind. The plane is actually only traveling at 50 knots over the ground. That's kind of complicated, so if you are getting confused by that, don't worry about it and watch my airspeed tutorial. Right, let's take off. Right, so what we're doing now, we're putting full power on, and we're just steering the plane with our rudder pedals. We're just sliding our feet around, trying to keep on the center line. And you're gonna see whenever we get about 60 knots. So now we're at 60, we're gonna start pulling back. Right, and there we go, climbing away. And if I let go, so I'm not let go now, so my trim was set for takeoff, but it's climbing away quite fast really. So it's doing about 90 knots. Right, so we're climbing away too quickly for what we want. So the important thing is to leave full power on. So in GA aircraft, you leave your full power on whenever you're trying to climb. And we're climbing away faster than we want to, so we're going to trade that airspeed for altitude. So we're going to pull back. And there you go. So we'll keep it about 70 knots. So now I've pulled back to maintain 70 knots, and because the aircraft is trimmed too fast, I'm going to have to keep pressure on my yoke to maintain 70 knots. So what I can do is I can add in some nose up trim until I can let that pressure go on the yoke, and then the airplane will just fly away at that airspeed. So I'm not touching anything anymore. The airspeed's decreasing a little bit, so I've trimmed too much nose high. So I'm going to push the nose down a little bit. I'm going to get it back to 70 knots, and then I'm going to add a little bit of nose down trim. And so hopefully it should more or less hold 70 knots eventually. So yeah, that's it. Climbing away in trim, right? Let's say we've finished taking off. We're going to level off 1,500 feet. First thing we do is we get to 1,500 feet. So we let our altitude increase to 1,500 feet. There it is, 1,500. Push the nose forward. Let the airspeed increase to our cruising speed. We're going to keep using our elevator control, so our push in and pull out control to maintain that 1,500 feet. When we get to 100 knots, we're going to adjust our power so that it maintains the 100 knots. And then we're going to adjust our trim. So I'm having to push forward on the yoke, I'm going to trim nose down, so push forward on the trim until I can take that pressure off the yoke. And there we go, more or less it. Not putting any pressure on the yoke, and it's more or less maintaining 100 knots, 1,500 feet. Boom, easy. So that's how to trim. The next things we're going to talk about is probably landing. Before we do that, we're going to have a talk about flaps. So I'm going to reposition myself so that we can come in and do example landing, which I'll screw up. Right, so we've seen how to trim, and we know how to turn. That's fairly self-explanatory. This is our altimeter, we know that. So we're going to go and land, right? Piece of piss. All we have to do is touch the ground gently at a relatively slow airspeed. Why do you land slow, or slow as you can? Because you want to get stopped on the runway. If you're landing on a short runway, you're going to use all of it up, and you want to be at a speed where the plane just about wants to stop flying, and that makes landing much easier. So what do we do to do that? Well, we use our flaps, and the flaps are these things on the wing. Remember, they pop down. We'll show you some. Plane's got a pitch about, but that'll be okay. So there's our flaps there, and what do they do? Well, they just increase the area of the wing, and they allow the plane to fly slower. So they increase the amount of lift on the wing. They don't slow you down by themselves. They allow you to fly slower by increasing the amount of lift that the wing produces. So there's our runway over here. So what we're going to do is we're currently in a position called downwind. In other words, we're traveling parallel to the runway in the opposite direction that we're going to land in. So what we're going to do is we're going to fly down here, we're going to turn left onto what you call base leg, and then we're going to turn left onto final, and we're going to land. If you want to know more about circuit flying, I have a video on it. You can watch it. We're going to get to the end of the downwind leg, which will be about 45 degrees off from our runway. Right, so we're coming up to about 45 degrees off the runway. That'll do nicely. So what do? Well, we turn left 90 degrees. So we put the roll in, and because we've turned, you might need to put a little bit of back pressure on your yoke to maintain your height. Because whenever you turn, you lose a little bit of lift, and the plane will sink. As you can see, it's doing quite nicely. So now we're on what you call base leg, and on base leg you slow down your speed a little bit. So we're slowing down to about 70 knots, that'll do nicely, and we're going to keep our descent coming down because we've slowed down a little bit, and we're within the flap maneuvering speed. So you can see this little white arc on the airspeed indicator. That's our flap maneuvering speeds. So not really a big deal if you put it down too early, but there we go. First these are flaps, and you can see the flaps are down, right? So we were going to retrim for 70 knots. And we're going to keep descending. Not too much. There's our runway. So now we're going to turn on the final. We're going to put our next stage of flaps in. So we would slow down more, which I've done a really, really bad job of. So what we're going to do is we can pitch up, pull our power back, pitch up, let the airspeed bleed off, put our next stage of flaps in. Our flaps are going down on the wing. And what we're looking to do now is just line up with the center line of the runway. The center line is a big line going down the middle, really straightforward. And you just want to keep that line looking as straight as possible. So if it looks like it's turned one way or the other, then you're not straight on the runway. So hopefully this should be about right. Okay, I've flown through the center line, so let's correct that. So you can see that the line is pointing off to the right, so that means we're to the right. So we're gonna just fly to the left until the line looks really straight. That doesn't look too bad, looks pretty good. So we're gonna fly at 60 knots now. We're trimming up for 60 knots. We're adjusting our power to maintain our descent rate. So if we were coming down too fast, we would just add a little bit of power on. And ideally, you're looking to land on the two white blocks, somewhere around there. So we might not, because I'm flying all over the place, but that's the ideal scenario. So we can use all of our flaps if we wanted to, but I'm just going to use 2 stages of flaps today. And we're going to aim for those white markers. We're going to get to, we're just above the ground, we're going to close the power, and we're going to pull back, and we're just going to hold that pitch. So you're not going to pitch up anymore, you're just going to hold it until the main wheel is touched down. There you go, touch down, and we're going to use our rudder pedals to keep it straight on the runway. So that's it, yeah. Really straightforward. That's how you fly. And yeah, any questions, put them in the comments section. If you like the video and you want to see some more tutorials, please subscribe. And what else did I have to say? Yeah, have fun. If you crash, don't worry about it. Just keep going, it's not real. Bye.